So, okay, obviously we're talking about Alex O'Connor not being vegan anymore. So I'm going to go over his statement after I go over some other stuff first. I think there's some interesting stuff to pick apart in there. There's definitely some very telling things. I think some very grim things. I think there's at least 2 or 3 things in there that look pretty bad, I would say. But I want to start by just kind of going through all the reasons that he may have started to eat animals again. And so I'm doing this because I think, one instance of anything is important, but it's actually the broader pattern of things we want to be looking at. And so we're going to keep seeing these ex-vegans pop up, right? And so what we want to do is actually understand what is actually happening there. We want to get a good handle on why it's happening, what are the underlying causes, how can we combat those causes, how can we talk to those people who are no longer vegan and potentially get them to be vegan again. And so I think that's kind of where I want to start with it, and then we'll really zero in on his statement in a second. Now, purportedly, the reason he gives is that he was struggling to be healthy on a plant-based diet. He unfortunately is pretty vague about this. He doesn't really give us a lot of details as to in what way he wasn't healthy or the things that he's tried. So it's unfortunately quite vague. I think that's one of my big problems with this post, is that I think if you're going to make this announcement, you should actually come out with more detail rather than leaving anyone in the dark here. And in fact, at first I thought that it might be either a hoax or a hack, or maybe some sort of social experiment that he was doing. But based on what I heard on David Ram's podcast, David Rams apparently knows someone close to him and basically confirmed that this is not a hoax. It's not a joke. And so I'm going to basically be moving forward acting as if this is in fact real and he is starting to eat animals and their secretions again. So, okay, so let's go through the reasons that this might have happened, the reasons he has for doing this. And I'm going to kind of tag them at different levels of charitability and also different levels of probability. So this first one, there's kind of two mixed up here, and that is for social media clout, or what I'm calling the carnivore cash out. So social media clout, I've heard some people saying, he just started being a vegan and talking about veganism to grab more followers. This one I find to be both uncharitable and unlikely. The reason being is that he already had, as far as I can tell, is a pretty good subscriber base based on atheism. I think there's a lot more people who are atheists. There's a lot more people who are just generally interested in philosophy. And so he did a lot of atheism and philosophy stuff before this. Vegans represent a pretty small percentage of the population, so I don't know how many more people you're grabbing by appealing to veganism, particularly, especially when he could be appealing to other things and using that time in a different way. So that one I don't find to be too plausible, but it is possible, right? All these things are possible, and I'm sure maybe we'll get some more light shed onto them recently. Now, the carnivore cash out is kind of interesting. So this is basically the move that we see people do where they say they're no longer vegan, they start to eat, they start off with seafood, maybe a little eggs, and then they go full-blown carnivore or very, at least omnivore who's heavily into eating grass-fed beef and things like that. And so I think there is a chance that might happen, even if it wasn't the plan to begin with. The financial incentives may just be too strong and they may start pulling him in that direction. So whether or not he had that in mind going into this, I don't know, maybe a small probability, but I think there's not a high probability. I think there's a moderate probability that it happens just because of, we've seen these little carnivore channels who are the videos are trash, the reasoning is trash, and they just absolutely explode because this is what people want to hear. They want to hear that their bad habits are good, right? And so I hope that he can resist those incentives and at the very least be kind of silent rather than going full-blown, promoting, carnivory or ethical omnivorism or whatever. So I'm really hoping that's not the case. I think that's also a kind of, that's an uncharitable read on it. And so I'm trying to be charitable here, but I do at least want to flag all the possibilities because, we've seen this before. Next one is that he had a genuine nutrition problem. This is the one that I'm hoping it is, which makes me think that it is definitely not true, because usually the reason that you're hoping for is one that you're kind of lying to yourself about a little bit. So I'm hoping what happened is that he had some sort of genuine nutrition problem here. he never seemed that interested in nutrition. I know this can be kind of hard to believe because he's like pretty intelligent, and also he has access to basically any vegan nutritionist he wants. He is, has access to anyone in the vegan community. He can message anyone on Instagram, even if he doesn't know a nutritionist or a doctor or whatever, he can talk to someone who does know a good one. And so it seems kind of hard to believe that he could mess this up. But it is possible. I think there is sometimes, particularly with different domains, certain people who are like, oh, maybe I'm into philosophy and I kind of look down on nutrition, or I'm into science and I sort of look down on, literary stuff or whatever. So people in one domain can kind of look down on another domain, and they can also get a little Dunning-Kruger effect where they think they know more than they do about it. So maybe he thought that he knew quite a bit about nutrition and he just kind of overestimated his ability, and there were some weak spots in it. The thing about this that seems to me to be implausible is that, like I said, he could talk to other people about this. He has just so many people in his life who could troubleshoot with him that it does seem hard to believe. One thing I do want to bring up here, though, is this brought up something that I think we don't talk about a lot as vegans, and that's the DHA, EPA, the omega-3 issue. So we all know that there's a bunch of rich sources of ALA, which is an omega-3, and so you've got chia seeds, you've got hemp seeds, you've got flax seeds, you've got walnuts, all the big ones, right? And so eating those, you can get enough omega-3s that you need. There does seem to be some research that shows, though, that some people are low or no converters of that ALA, meaning they can't convert the ALA to EPA and DHA, and so that they can't actually access like the usable form of it. Now, the solution to that is that you use algae supplements, right? So you can get algal DHA and EPA and things like that. And not only can you get those separately, but you can also get those mixed into other multivitamins. In fact, there's like 10 different brands of these vegan multivitamins, which they're all the same thing. They're like EPA, DHA, and then like the big things that are sometimes low in a vegan diet, like calcium, iodine, magnesium, zinc, whatever. And so there's also a ton of those. So again, like, maybe he missed that part and he didn't, he wasn't supplementing with DHA, EPA, and he wasn't eating much ALA, and he was like a low converter. If all those things aligned, that could be possible. Again, it doesn't seem super likely, especially since he could troubleshoot this. This is what I'm hoping it is, though, because if this is the case, then this is something very easily fixable. And so obviously that has its advantages. I think that's probably low probability, though, but that's what I want to be true. Although it's bad in another way, because if that is the case and he puts such little effort into troubleshooting and figuring it out, then I think that says something really unfortunate about how seriously he took animal rights to begin with. Now, this is the one that I think that even if this wasn't the primary cause, it's always in the background doing some work, and that's social pressure. Okay, so particularly knowing the company that he keeps. So he's in that social circle with Michaela Peterson. Seems like he's in the circle with Daddy Peterson. I've seen him go on some other podcasts too. I can't remember what the guy's name is, but struck me as maybe like a thoughtful omnivore or something. And so when you're surrounded by people who have a different ideology than you, even if you don't notice it consciously, they're going to be subconsciously affecting the way that you think about things, right? And so there's this saying that, you are the average of the 5 people that you hang out with the most. Now, I'm sure that's not perfectly true, or there's not, necessarily research to back that exact thing up. But it is true to some degree, right? And you'll notice this in your own life. The people that you hang out with, you'll start adopting their mannerisms or their joking style or maybe their intonation. And you'll start sort of adopting the ideologies that the people around you have. And even if you don't adopt them fully, you can feel yourself getting kind of pulled towards them a little bit, like, oh, okay, this isn't as unreasonable as I thought. And so if those are the kinds of people he's surrounding himself with, you could see that his ideology may be getting pulled, even if not completely, in that direction. And so like it sets him up to kind of fall back into, carnism. When maybe something else pops up. All right, so those are, I think, are the 3 big sort of like explanations for this that I think everyone is kind of putting forward. But there's something else I want to talk about here, and it's kind of related to the health thing. And I just did a video on this recently. Definitely check that video out. I was like very happy with the way it came out. I thought it was very important. It's basically about anecdotes. And it's specifically about not only how bad anecdotes are, and I go into a lot of detail there because I know everyone knows like, oh, anecdotes, they're bad, we shouldn't use anecdotes. But I found that very few people can really explain all the reasons they're bad and just how bad they are. And it's important here. But the other thing in that video that I talk about is how convincing anecdotes are. So basically, for most things, statistical evidence is going to be more convincing to most people. But there's a few scenarios when anecdotes are much more convincing. And that's basically when stories are personally relevant, when they're health related, and when they have extreme consequences, right? And I even pointed out in that video that this is like the ex-vegan like trifecta, right? So if Alex was experiencing some sort of health problem, right, his own anecdotal explanation is going to be extremely convincing to him as to why that is, right? And statistics and studies are not going to be as convincing. Pair that with the fact that it didn't seem like he was too schooled or too knowledgeable about the nutrition studies to begin with, and I think we kind of have like a, a perfect storm there. And so let me kind of frame this, I guess, in sort of my own story. And so this is where I'll tell you sort of some personal stories about my life. So when I think I was 22, 23, I was walking through a Barnes & Noble, just having a totally normal day, right? Just chilling. And all of a sudden, my heart started racing. Everything like kind of took a black halo around it, like in my vision. I felt like something was pressing down on me, and I couldn't, like, not quite physical, but like something almost existential was pressing down on me. And I started just absolutely freaking out, right? I went to my girlfriend at the time and said, like, I got to get out of here. You got to drive me home. I do not know what's going on. I think I'm having a heart attack. I felt like I was going insane. Like I was like literally like my mind was breaking into pieces. And she took me home. We started talking, thinking about it. And what it was, which I didn't know quite at the moment, but what we kind of figured out was that I had been on an SSRI, which is a type of antidepressant called Paxil. And I was on it for like obsessive compulsiveness. And I'd gotten off of it recently. And I'd even like stepped down, done all the things that they said to do, do it gradually or whatever. But when you come off of SSRIs, you can have just these absolutely terrible symptoms, right? And the symptoms are all very like subjective in nature, most of them. So it's not like, it's not like your leg falls off or something. Or that your blood sugar is off or things like that, right? It's all very subjective. So I was having all kinds of crazy stuff. Like I was hallucinating. I was feeling like I was like watching myself from a camera behind my head. Like I felt like my free will, like the feeling of free will was stripped from me. I had all sorts of like these qualitative experiences that I couldn't even explain. Like I can't explain them now because I never had them before or after. It was like locked into while I was withdrawing from this. I was incredibly depressed, incredibly anxious all the time, like super suicidal. I went from like 220 pounds to, I believe, 150 pounds in 3 weeks or 2 weeks, I think. I lost, something like 60 pounds in 2 weeks. It was absolutely insane, right? And I struggled with that for years then. I had a very protracted withdrawal process. But the reason I tell you that is because during that time, I know about anecdotes, I knew about science, I knew about biases, fallacies, I knew about all this stuff, I knew what was wrong with anecdotes, I knew like how we could trick ourselves, I knew all of it. And during that time, I tricked myself over and over and over again. So, I'd be like, maybe when I drink milk, it actually makes this worse. Or maybe when I eat bread, it makes it worse. And this was before I was a vegan, so that's cow's milk in that instance. Or maybe it's sugar. And I'd convince myself, I'd be like, every time I eat sugar, I feel bad. And then I'd eat sugar, then I'd stop eating sugar. Then I'd eat it again. I'd be like, I felt bad both times when I ate it. I felt good when I didn't. It must be sugar. And then come to find out a couple weeks later, I ate sugar, I kind of forgot about it, and I didn't feel bad, right? I did the same thing with whatever, bread, cow's milk, all these things. And I kept convincing myself over and over that it was like this thing that was making it worse, or this thing that was making it worse, right? And I was just using my anecdotal experience to convince myself. And again, this is me knowing all the problems with it and still convincing myself, right? So how can I lose 20 pounds a week? Yeah, because I couldn't eat anything. This was the other thing that was very weird, is that like, it's not just that I wasn't hungry. I would try to put food in my mouth and eat it, but like I wouldn't produce any saliva. And like I literally couldn't swallow the food. It was absolutely insane. It is like SSRI withdrawal, truly bad SSRI withdrawal, I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. Someone could like kill my whole family and I wouldn't wish SSRI withdrawal on them. It is absolutely terrible. But the point is, whenever something is affecting your health, and is like really serious, you can get tricked into anecdotal thinking very easily. And so, as if that wasn't bad enough, I finally got out of that in my late 20s. And then in my early 30s, I got Lyme disease, like legit Lyme disease, like did all the tests, like, had the Western blot, all this stuff, like 100% Lyme disease. And also I tested positive for Rocky Mountain spotted fever. So this tick was like super infected. And not quite as bad as Paxil withdrawal, but a lot of the same things ended up happening to me again. A lot of these sort of vague, subjective feelings that I couldn't, you can't really like measure like how depressed you are. You can't measure how much you're hallucinating or whatever. And I found myself doing the same thing. This was me way older, way wiser, and knowing that I had fallen prey to that anecdotal thinking before, and I still did it again, like when I had Lyme disease and really serious health effects. And so like when you're having really serious health effects, it is so easy to fall into that thinking and to try to reach for anything that you possibly can to feel better. And so this is a possibility, right? This is what I want to be, this is in some ways what I want to be the case here, and I think it's the most charitable read. Now, again, like I don't think it's necessarily the case. When I say I think it's maybe a little more probable, I think all these things are definitely in the running for probability. But I say that basically just to highlight how even if you know something really well, even if you know all about these biases and things, it's not always a defense against them. And so like the other thing too is if you have this paired with a social group who's like, hey man, maybe you should eat some cow flesh again, maybe you should eat some fish, whatever, right? Pair that with the social group and you can see why these things may build on each other, right? And so this is part of the reason I made that anecdote video was for ex-vegan but just anecdotes in general, because they are so powerfully convincing to us and they are such bad evidence. And I feel like we cannot stress that enough, what bad evidence they are compared with how persuasive and convincing they can be. And so I just wanted to really like hammer home that point. And you might even think like, oh, well, he's pretty smart or I'm pretty smart, and so I wouldn't fall prey to those. Being smart is not a defense against these. There's a book I'm reading right now, I'm rereading, I guess, called Scout Mindset, and she goes through some stuff in there. And the point of the book is like how to think more rationally, how to get out of just like defending your team and your side and being more objective and trying to actually find the truth. Like this is the entire aim of the book, Scout Mindset. And she talks about several times in there, right? Being smart doesn't defend against this. It's not like, because people who are smart basically are just better at coming up with reasons for defending whatever it is they want to defend. And it's not just her. Like if you listen to podcasts about biases, fallacies, all this stuff, this comes up time and time again. And in fact, even there's this researcher named Laurie Santos. She does happiness research at Stanford. And she has this thing called the G.I. Joe principle. And I'm going to just kind of play this video for you guys because I think it's interesting. And it basically touches on that topic of how just knowing about biases and things doesn't actually defend against them. So let me see if I can get this up real quick here. I thought I had it. Hold on. Yeah, give me 1 second. But yeah, so it is it's not the defense you would think it is, unfortunately. Yeah, hold on. I lost this video for some reason. Annoying. G.I. Joe. Okay, here we go. So can everyone hear that okay?
Hi, my name is Laurie Santos. I teach psychology at Yale University, and today I want to talk to you about the G.I. Joe fallacy. This lecture is in the series on cognitive biases. If you've watched a bunch of these videos, you've probably gotten a bit better at noticing your biases at work, and knowing that you might fall prey to them. You might also think that knowing about your biases would, naturally, make you less susceptible to them. Unfortunately, it's not always that simple. In fact, if you think knowing your biases is all you need to overcome them, then you'd be falling prey to yet another bias, the G.I. Joe fallacy. If you're a child of the 1980s, then you might have a guess about where the name from this bias comes from. Yes, it's from that cartoon known as G.I. Joe. Maybe you remember how these shows ended. Each episode had a sort of cheesy public service announcement that ended with the show's famous epithet. Now you know, and knowing is half the battle. The problem with this idea, the idea that knowing is half the battle, is that cognitive science has shown us that merely knowing about our biases is often way less than half the battle. Now, there are certainly some cases where knowing is half the battle, knowing your multiplication tables, for example, or knowing which aisle the milk is in, but there are many more where it's not the case, cases where just knowing something doesn't really help us all that much. For example, you may know that standing on the Grand Canyon skywalk is perfectly safe, but your mind will still feel like it's pretty scary. You may know that arbitrary anchors can mess up your final judgment, but you'll still feel like it's best to get 5 chocolates when you see a 5 for $5 sign. Finally, you may know that different wordings can affect your intuitions, but you still may be more hesitant to take a risk involving lives lost than lives saved. Years and years of research on cognitive biases has shown that knowing or recognizing yourself as having information is only a small part of what controls our behavior. In day-to-day situations, most of our behavioral control comes from other processes, like our habits, or the situations we find ourselves in, and not from our conscious selves. This is why shaping our situations, to nudge our behavior in the right direction, or even just learning to regulate your emotions, over time can be really powerful. The funniest part of the G.I. Joe fallacy is that even knowing about it, as the fallacy would predict, is less than half the battle. Even if you know that knowing is less than half the battle, you still have a tendency to think that what you consciously know is the main thing that controls your behavior. But it's not. Even if you've watched all of these videos, you are still going to be subject to the same effects that the videos describe. For most cognitive biases, including the G.I. Joe fallacy, knowing is not even half the battle. And so now you know, and that's less than half the battle.
All right, so sorry for that depressing video, but I do think it's important to understand. Yeah. All right, so yeah, I know that's like kind of depressing to think about, but sorry, hold on one sec, sorry. Having some technical issues here. Okay. So basically, that's kind of the point I wanted to express here, is that, like, you know, just knowing about biases, fallacies, all these things, it doesn't help. Health can be really problematic when it comes to tricking you about these things. And intelligence isn't really a buffer against it. So I think given all those things, I think that is probably the most charitable read that you can have on it. That doesn't mean it's true. In some sense, I would like to believe that's true, or that it's the simple health thing, right? Obviously, I don't want to believe that he's going to do this carnivore cash out bullshit. That would be pretty unfortunate. But those are, I think, are like the big things to look at. Now, the thing about the biases, like just knowing about them doesn't help you. I am going to be doing a video coming up here soon on this book, Scout Mindset. And it's one of the best books I know of that understands that just knowing about these things doesn't help, but it actually gives you actionable ways to bootstrap your way out of these things, right? To A, recognize that you're doing it, and then B, it gives you these sort of mental models and like practices you can do to actually be less biased. And I know Natalie Fulton, she also read this book and she really liked it. So maybe me and her can do a live stream on it too at some point. But really good book, and I think something that would definitely help to maybe flesh some of this stuff out. So yeah, that's my general take on, I guess, ex-vegans in general, anecdotes, health, all that. So I think now we can kind of just get into reading this, and I'll give you like my specific thoughts on the sorts of things that Cosmic Skeptic has said here. Alrighty. What did you say, Cosmic Skeptic? All right, so let's just read through this. So, hi everyone. Recently, I've noticed people wondering why I've been so inactive and wondering why I have not uploaded any veganism-related content. For quite some time, I have been reevaluating my ethical position on eating animals, which is something people have also noticed. But what we will not know is that I have also been struggling privately to maintain a healthy plant-based diet. Yep. Okay, so that's just basically what we talked about. Now, this next part I think is the most damning part of the entire thing, right? I wanted to let you know that because of this, I have for some time now been consuming animal products again, primarily but not exclusively seafood, and experimenting with how best to integrate them into my life. Okay, so and I'm not the first person to notice this, obviously, but we've got a lot of problems here. So the first thing is like using the euphemism seafood. I found that to be a little weird and telling, perhaps here. You know, he could have just said specifically fish or oysters or whatever it is that he's eating. The second thing, of course, is primarily but not exclusively. So it means that he's probably also eating eggs, I'm guessing. This is the typical ex-vegan move, is eat fish and eat eggs. But he could be eating cow's milk. He could be eating pig flesh, whatever, right? And so I think the problem here for me is that, so Alex comes at this from a utilitarian standpoint, right? So being consistent, if let's like just grant for argument's sake that he literally cannot be healthy without eating animal flesh, right? Let's grant that for the sake of argument. And he's coming at it from a utilitarian lens. If that is the case, right, we would say that oysters, right, of all animals, minus like sponges or whatever, probably have the lowest probability of sentience. We can kind of look at that based on, the complexity of their neurology, number of neurons, behavior, that sort of thing, right? Now, that doesn't mean that we don't think they're sentient, but just like they're lower than pigs, they're lower than chickens, whatever, right? If we're kind of talking in inferential probabilities. So it seems that the logical and the consistent thing to do from taking this like utilitarian animal suffering minimization standpoint would be to just eat oysters, right? If there's something magical in animal flesh that he needs, then you can just eat oysters. But he doesn't say oysters, right? And if he was just eating oysters, he would definitely say oysters here because he's well aware of like that ethical sort of wrinkle or that ethical debate in veganism, right? And he also doesn't say exclusively. So even if seafood was referring to oysters, which it isn't because he would have just said oysters, there's additional like secretions or flesh on top of that. And I think that's definitely the most grim and like like really hits me thing about this post, because that does seem to indicate just like, again, like I just don't know what this is the part that makes me be more skeptical and want to give a less charitable interpretation, like something like this, like carnivore cash out. Or maybe that social pressure was like way too strong, because this just doesn't seem in line with his other values, right? This, like, you could eat all the same things you were eating on a vegan diet and throw in oysters, right? And that would at least seem to be consistent with what you're claiming. But because these other things are in there, that doesn't seem consistent with the whole story. And even the fact that he's coming out and saying that before putting out like a full, more like fleshed out video or whatever, super worrying. So I think that's probably, if there was any nail in the coffin here, that would be it, I would say. I'm interested in philosophy and never enjoy sharing personal information about myself, but I can obviously see why this particular update is both necessary and relevant. It's not my intention to go into too much detail here, as I think that will require more space and perhaps a video, but rather to let you know with more details to follow later. Again, this is another part that kind of just sucks from a messaging standpoint. You know, it's like Alex has like 500,000 followers. A lot of them are vegans. A lot of them probably went vegan because of Alex. And so to like lead with a vague post, it does seem irresponsible. It's going to raise like more questions than it answers, right? I mean, he could have just put out a very pointed, like point by point reason. This is why I'm no longer vegan, blah, blah, blah. And then we wouldn't have had to do like all this guesswork, because there's no way, like there's no way you put out the statement and everyone holds back and it's like, oh, I'm not going to make a video or any commentary. I'll just wait till he actually says his whole deal, right? That's not going to happen. And he knows it's not going to happen. He's been on YouTube for years, right? He knows how this goes. My opposition to factory farming remains unchanged, as do my views regarding the need to view non-human animals as morally worthy beings whose interests actually matter. Okay, so this could be anywhere from a good sign to trivial. Like, it's good that he's still thinking that, animals morally matter, but this is kind of what most people think, at least to some degree, people think that animals matter. And most people are against factory farming, right? So it's like, it's kind of more about what you do with it. And then also that added level of being against exploitation and use and like unnecessary killing and things, right? Because you can have local farms, and you can even have local farms that employ a lot of like torture, right? Like, I've done videos on local pig farms, and even on local farms, pigs get castrated with no painkillers. And it's like some of the most harrowing footage I've ever seen. Right? And so those aren't factory farms, but they're still causing a ton of suffering. And even if they didn't, right, you still have the issue of being killed against their will and being used. So like, again, it doesn't really address any of that stuff. It sounds like it could be written by virtually anyone, any non-vegan. So, I don't know. I don't know about that. However, I am no longer convinced of the appropriateness of an individual-focused boycott in responding to these problems, and I'm increasingly doubtful of the practicability of maintaining a healthy plant-based diet in the long term. So two things here. Again, it's like this individual-focused boycott. Like, obviously, that's that's part of what veganism is. But like, I don't think most people who are vegan are like the only way to do this is with a boycott and no other ways work. You know what I mean? It's like the boycott is a piece of the puzzle, right? And it's also sort of just like a personal stand against something immoral. Like, even if this wasn't super useful to go vegan, it would still make a symbolic difference, right? As a sort of like a stand and a principled position against this exploitation. So like, again, I don't think you definitely don't need to think it's the only thing. And you don't even really need to think that you as an individual will make a specific difference. I mean, I've argued in the past that you definitely do make a difference as an individual. I mean, you can watch those videos if you like. But even if we grant all these things, it still doesn't really seem to make sense. Doubtful of the practicability or practicability of maintaining a healthy plant-based diet in the long term. Again, like, this is, if he was saying for himself, that would be more understandable than generalizing it to everybody, right? He knows there's people who have been healthy and plant-based for an extremely long time. So like, because this seems to be more like making a broader objective statement. And so that's just another one that's just like, oof, like, you can say that it didn't work for you, but don't make this extra leap, right? Because now you're looking at essentially anecdotes compared to, like, we have studies that show, it's not that you know other anecdotes of people who have, maintained healthy, good health on a plant-based diet. But then we also have controlled studies on this. So like, that's another point, just like, it really grated on me there. At the very least, even if I'm way off base and totally mistaken in my assessments, I do not wish to see people consuming a diet on my account if I've been unable to keep up with that diet myself. Even if I am making a mistake, in other words, I want it to be known that I have made it. Okay, so I guess I don't totally see, I mean, he's just basically saying like, I couldn't do it, so I shouldn't have told you to do it. Yeah, I guess so. I don't really have a lot of commentary on that. I mean, obviously, I think you should still tell, like, even if maybe I don't even really agree with that. Like, okay, even if I can't, like, adhere to certain, maybe I'm like, I really, like, I'm into the environment, but I just like, well, actually, no, maybe this, okay. I know that cigarettes are bad for you, and I tell everyone you should stop smoking, but I keep smoking because I, like, am addicted to cigarettes or have weak willpower or whatever. So I think there's totally, like, you can totally tell people that like you should be doing X, even if you yourself can't do it. I'll take a hot take there. If you know that it's good for, especially if you know there's a victim involved, yeah, and you just don't have the willpower or the skills or the know-how to do it, I think you can still point out that it's the ethical thing to do for other people. So yeah, maybe I disagree with that. I've changed my mind and behavior publicly on a great many things before, but this feels the most difficult to address by a large margin, obviously, because the amount of hate is going to be pretty big. Although I will say that like the comments on this post actually were pretty understanding, and like I feel like some of them were challenging but still understanding. I did not want to speak about it until I was sure that I couldn't make it practically work. Some of you will not care, some may understand, some will be angry, and others upset. Naturally, this is quite embarrassing and humbling moment, so I also understand and accept that there will be some I told you so's. Okay, yeah, and like, okay, obviously people are feeling, some people are feeling annoyed, frustrated, shocked, betrayed, whatever. All these are all valid emotions. These are all things that you can expect to feel when, someone who is prominent in the movement, suddenly recants on the movement. So I know I was in a bit of state of shock last night. I definitely, for a second, I just like didn't believe it. I thought it was a joke. It was Catherine Klein. She like shot me a message, and I hadn't seen it anywhere else yet. And it was just like this message in a group chat that was like, "Oh yeah, Cosmic Skeptic, blah blah blah." And I was like, "This is BS. Like she's messing with us, But she was not messing with us. That was my denial stage. Whatever the case, please know that this experience has inspired a deep self-reflection, and that I will be duly careful in future regarding the forthrightness of my convictions. I'm especially sorry to those who are now vegan activists on account of my content, and hope that they know I will still effort with you to bring about the end of factory farming. To them and to everyone else, I appreciate your viewership and engagement always, as well as your feedback and criticisms. So here again, this harping on factory farming, it's giving me flashbacks to that Michaela Peterson video, where they were saying, yeah, there's the ethical, whatever, rotational grazing, grass-fed farming, and then there's the factory farms. And so it's just like, it really is, this is why when he says, not exclusively seafood, this is what's making me think it's like maybe not even just eggs he's eating. Like, is he actually eating cow flesh and pig flesh again? I mean, again, pig flesh may be one of the most insane ones to me if he's going all the way that far, because I do feel, I don't know, it's hard to say like what is the worst of the worst, because they're all bad in their own ways. But to me, the pig industry has always struck me as like uniquely horrific and nightmarish. And so, if he's going back to that, just, I don't know, man. I don't know. It's pretty rough. Yeah. So yeah, those are my basic thoughts. Like I said, I wanted to do something a little bit different than most people. I just wanted to kind of give my thoughts on some of those things and let you know that there are going to be, a video in the future kind of talking about how to address these sorts of things, how to like defend against your own biases and things. And man, I don't know. I do feel like I want to do maybe a little more things about vegan nutrition in the future, just because I feel like this is going to be a whole storm of content now coming out about vegan diet and health. And so we'll see.